to the Oregon Real Estate Podcast, where we feature helpful and interesting information on Oregon real estate.
Hello. My voice may sound a little familiar. Today's program is appropriately titled, What James Bond Can Teach You About Oregon Real Estate. Now, here's your host, Realtor Roy Whiting.
Why, thank you for that nice introduction, Mr. Connery. Hello, and welcome to the Oregon Real Estate Podcast. My name is Roy Whiting, and I'm a licensed Oregon real estate broker with Certified Realty. Today's program is titled, What James Bond Can Teach You About Oregon Real Estate. To begin with, the task of buying and selling Oregon properties may not seem to have a lot in common with someone like super secret agent James Bond. Yet, like Oregon home sellers and home buyers, James Bond typically has a very well-defined goal. And on top of that, James Bond has to deal with a lot of uncertainty. This matches nicely with the task of buying and selling property. We often don't know exactly how long it's going to take for a transaction to close. And before that, if there's an appraisal, a home inspection, or some other factors such as a contingent sale of a different property in order for a transaction to go through, we just don't know exactly how it's going to all pan out. So what can Oregon home buyers and home sellers learn from James Bond for their next transaction? First is the degree of risk. Agent 007 is frequently seen as a daring and tremendous risk taker. But while it's true some of his actions are potentially perilous, it's helpful to realize that his risks tend to be very calculated. As a result, Oregon home buyers can reduce their risk by hiring a home inspector and being pre-qualified before the sale. Oregon home sellers can price their property accurately so as to not run the risk of being deemed as overpriced by the market. Another trait that James Bond has in spades is confidence. It's helpful to know that when you've been looking at homes for some period of time, maybe a few weeks or a month or two, you know a lot more than you realize you do. You've been brought up to speed with what properties are likely overpriced, what to look for in the next home that you want to purchase. And so it's important to feel and understand how much you do know and not second guess yourself constantly. It's also helpful to lean on your realtor to make sure that if you do have questions, you're getting it from a professional. James Bond also maintains his humor. Even in some of the grittiest situations, he's usually able to step back and crack a joke. If during the home buying process, your lender seems to be constantly bombarding you with requests for documentation in the underwriting phase, it's helpful to remember that there is an end to the process. One of the other characteristics we see with James Bond is his savoir-faire. Savoir-faire is a French term that roughly means knowing what to do in any situation. Savoir-faire can be adapted to Oregon real estate quite easily because a wide variety of tough-to-predict situations occur with surprising frequency. When problems come up, as they most likely will, having a pragmatic, resourceful approach to the problem is what James Bond and successful Oregon home buyers and home sellers bring to the table. One other trait that Agent 007 has in great abundance is having a backup plan. Contingency plans are very helpful in dealing with buying and selling real estate. If your offer isn't accepted on that property that you really wanted, understand that there are others that will likely come along you'll like just as much. On top of that, sale fails do occur, and so you may get a second bite at the apple. For home sellers, having a backup plan might look like this. If you accept an offer from a buyer who starts to become a little difficult to work with, have your realtor contact those agents who had expressed interest with their buyers before you accepted the first offer. That way you can keep the lines of communication open in the event that you're not able to work things out with buyer number one. Let's look at one more trait James Bond has in abundance, and that's courage. Having courage when buying or selling Oregon real estate doesn't mean that you don't feel fear. it does involve pushing that fear aside to rise above whatever obstacle you're facing. 007 pushes himself out of his comfort zone to face serious fears on a daily basis. This gets him used to feeling comfortable with the uncomfortable. And as an Oregon home seller or a home buyer, once you desensitize yourself to fear, it will become easier for you to perform courageous acts like counter-offering that offer you really don't want to risk losing, or agreeing to substantial repairs in order to pass a home reinspection and close your transaction. That about wraps up this edition of the Oregon Real Estate Podcast. What James Bond can teach you about Oregon real estate. For more information, go ahead and check out the show notes over at OregonRealEstatePodcast.com. For now, this is Roy with Certified Realty, wishing you the very best.
Do you have a real estate question or perhaps an Oregon property to sell? Contact Roy today for a free consultation. Just call 800-637-1950 or send your email to roy@certifiedrealty.com. Thanks for listening to this edition of the Oregon Real Estate Podcast.